all of the cops out there who were born like 2 weeks ago, because we're getting older,
Sure.
and all of a sudden they're like, there's no serial number on your gun. And they're really hassling people about it. And so then people call me and they're like, hey, I mean, he finally gave it back to me, but it seemed like a really big deal. Am I doing something wrong? We are the Arms Attorneys. Today we are talking about unserialized firearms. We're going to talk about what happens if you are in possession of one where the serial number has been obliterated or tampered with. We're going to talk about what happens if you have one that has never had a serial number, and what happens and what is the status of your 3D printed guns and your 80% kits. But before we get started, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting the like button.
I can't believe you did that in one
I
time.
don't give no shits.
All right. Well, today we're talking about, and this came up in the news because of a high-profile incident that happened in the state of Florida. Sorry, YouTube gods, don't get mad at us for
No,
saying the word Florida.
I know, right? Can we say the government was in on it? Can we say that? That's what I'm saying.
I don't know, we'll see. We'll check out that view count in a little bit. So, but all right. So it raised a question. We've got some questions about the serialization requirement on firearms, obliterating or tampering with serial numbers, and finally, we have a lot of guns that don't have serial numbers. Generally, that's not an issue, but there's a little bit to it, so we have to talk about it. Now, where do we get this kind of general? Or let's go back in time to a world where there was no such thing.
The wavy, fuzzy lines. Yes. So if you go back to, let's go back, say, to 1967. Not nobody was thinking about serial numbers. However, we did have a shiny new gun law passed in 1968, which was called
Gun Control Act.
the Gun Control Act.
Yeah,
Why was the Gun Control Act passed, Richard?
Well, it might have history rhymes, and with the thing that happened in Florida, I'm not going to say the word.
Oh, yep. Well, that's exactly right. So we had some shootings of high profile figures, and that caused new gun control legislation. And of the many, 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 many things the Gun Control Act of 1968 brought us, it brought us the advent of serial numbers.
Right.
Serial numbers. Not that nothing was serialized before, but it wasn't mandatory.
It was the
before.
top of the slope of the slippery one, though.
It was. You know, the thing that it really brought us that pisses me off, though, is not being able to purchase interstate.
Yeah, that's messed up.
That really, like, what? Thought this was America. I should be able to drive in Louisiana and buy a gun. Anyway, neither here nor there. But yes, so serial numbers. So I still get phone calls from people on a fairly regular basis. And here's what happens is you've got an old gun and you are driving around with it and you get pulled over and the law takes it away from you, wants to run the serial number. There's no serial number. And all of the cops out there who were born like 2 weeks ago, because we're getting older,
Sure.
and all of a sudden they're like, there's no serial number on your gun. And they're really hassling people about it. And so then people call me and they're like, hey, I mean, he finally gave it back to me, but it seemed like a really big deal. Am I doing something wrong? And the answer is no, because if you're doing something wrong, he wouldn't have given it back to you. But it's all these, like, as law enforcement gets younger and younger, everyone forgets that serial numbers weren't a thing until fairly recently.
Right. Okay, so we're looking at the Gun Control Act of 1968. That's in October. And this is where we got our general requirement that manufacturers now, going forward, you have to serialize the firearms that you're manufacturing. That's in 18 U.S.C. 923I. Now, we have another corollary provision for NFA items. That's in 26 U.S.C. 5861G. And then we say, okay, so manufacturers, you got to start including these serial numbers. Well, hey, person who has a serialized firearm, what is to stop them from removing it?
So we have 18 U.S.C. 922K, which I'm just going to read out a little bit so people have an idea. This section makes it unlawful for any person to knowingly transport, ship, or receive in interstate or foreign commerce any firearm that has had its serial number removed, obliterated, or altered. It is also illegal to possess such a firearm if it has moved in interstate or foreign commerce. You know what I think is hilarious about that, though?
I think I know where you're
You already know. So the actual act of obliterating the serial number isn't the crime.
It's possession.
It's possession. So, I mean, first of all, if like I come into possession and I don't check the serial number, and I don't notice, well, I'm committing an offense, but the guy who obliterated the serial number, not implicated.
Right.
And I like to imagine a world in which like I've somehow like obliterated the serial number and then like tossed the gun real fast. And
Sure.
I'm like, never possessed it. I mean,
Exactly.
I don't know how you obliterate without committing possession, but I'd like to imagine there's a way.
Sure.
Comment below if you can think of a way. Just joking.
So we have, all right. So we have a general requirement. These folks say you need to serialize these. Hey, people, once you got these serialized guns, can't possess these obliterated serial numbers if you can't knowingly possess them. And so that goes to, and it raises a bunch of issues with, okay, well, we have homemade firearms, we have 3D printed firearms, we have 80% kits, we have firearms parts kits, and the ATF has been making some moves or attempted moves on ghost guns, so spooky, trying to regulate these things, saying, hey, gun industry, you have to treat these things as firearms, serialize them. That rule has been is not in effect currently.
Correct. So they tried. However, and it was not, I mean, nothing the ATF does is reasonable. It's just shades of unreasonable. I will say, in the way they tried with the 80% lowers, it was not as unreasonable, because it was like if you already owned the kit, you didn't have to do anything, and it didn't really impose any restriction on the individual person, simply upon the FFL dealer, right, or the manufacturer to begin serializing. If you were an FFL in possession of some sort of, 80% lower, you had to serialize it if it came into your possession. Let's say someone put a firearm that was unserialized into your possession as an FFL, they checked it in for some gunsmithing overnight, you had to serialize it before you could release it, but the individual person was not under any obligation. But that is all enjoined. We are, back in the world in which, you get to make your own gun again without a serial number.
Right.
And 3D printed guns have always, ground my gears a little bit, because there are so many rumors and so many misconceptions about what you can and can't do with 3D printed guns. And I think law enforcement perpetuates that, because there's all that like, well, you can't do it if it has no metal parts, can't go through an x-ray. Well, there's always going to be metal parts, right?
Right.
There's no law.
I talked to a
against 3D
guy
printed
last
guns.
week who spoke to an ATF agent who told him the exact opposite of what we just talked about. Right. There's a problem out there. But again, that ghost gun
It is spooky season.
regulation, that related only to the manufacturers and sellers of the kits. It was not targeting folks who, let's say, already had these kits in their possession or were making stuff from complete scratch. So it wasn't for the consumers, it was for the manufacturers. But again, that's on hold. We're not worried about that right now. So to our folks who are hobbyists, who are making homemade firearms, maybe they're finishing out these 80% kits or 3D printing them, is there a serialization requirement?
No, there is not. Just do not alter, tamper with, or obliterate a serialized firearm in your possession. Do not possess one if someone tries to transfer it to you and you see that the serial number has been tampered with, altered, or obliterated, because not only do we have this federal offense, but it's a crime in every state that I know of. And I'm not saying there aren't some states out there where it's not a crime. I'm sure someone will comment and correct me, but it's a crime in almost every state. So you don't want to run up against that.
Yeah, and maybe to clarify a little bit, we're talking about on the federal level.
Yes.
And the vast majority of states. There are a handful of states that say, hey, if you make a homemade firearm, especially in these states that require registration, think
Yes.
California, think New York, you have a gun associated with your person in some centralized database, I imagine those are going to require serialization.
Correct. If you are living in certain parts of the country, you know who you are. You probably have a state's law that requires your serialization. But on the federal level, we are freer than in some states. God help us.
Yeah.
So.
But we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And please question and comment for us below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.